All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at what I'd like you to do today is a PowerPoint we were going to look at in class together. Here I am on our website, and here under strategy chapters, click on this, scroll down, and I want to click on PowerPoint chapter 29. Okay. So this PowerPoint covers what's called beginnings and endings, and it's specifically designed to sort of help illustrate ways we get started in writing, okay, as well as endings. We're going to cover beginnings today. So it says here, when you start looking at, or we look to start reading something, usually the opening sentences are important for grabbing your attention. With endings, it's one about finding closure. And here are some rough ways of looking at beginnings and endings. First of all, when it comes to beginnings, this is often influenced and determined by whatever your rhetorical situation, whatever purpose or audience you're writing for. Academic audiences oftentimes expect introduction with an ending with a thesis. What we're actually doing with this assignment is actually more of an informal, non-academic writing. So we're going to have, instead of a thesis statement, which is something we'll have in our other essays, we're actually going to be focused on the idea of actually having a hook. And it says here, most offer some kind of preview of the content or subject matter. This is still talking about the academic, and this is an example here of an academic introduction. So good to familiarize ourselves with this, but it'll be a little bit more applicable when we get into our later essays. So for example here, it starts off with Tom Brokaw, called the folks of the mid-20th century the greatest generation. So that starts with a statement. So why is the generation of our grandparents seen as this country's greatest? Now, that's an interesting, then it asks a question. Perhaps the reason is not what they accomplished, but what they endured. Many of the survivors feel today that don't have the people today don't have the moral character to withstand a depression like that. So they're talking about people who lived through the Great Depression. And then we get to the point where this is talking about their thesis statement. This paper will explore the Great Depression through the eyes of ordinary Americans in the most impoverished region of the country, the American South, in order to detail how they endured and how the government assisted them in this difficult era. So pretty simple off top here. Okay, so we start with a statement that establishes our opening of what we're going to be getting into. We pose a question. We turn around and offer a bit of an anecdotal kind of people from, that time frame would feel that today people aren't able to endure what they had to endure, and then that leads us to a thesis statement. So we got about 4 sentences there. So that's an academic introduction. Now, non-academic audiences need you to entice them. This is why we have the hook. To read on by connecting your text to their interests through shared experiences, anecdotes, and other attention-getting devices. And there's an example here from Cynthia Bass writing a newspaper article on the 135th anniversary of the Gettysburg Address. And so this is not going to be an academic one. So it says here, November 19th is the 130th anniversary of the Gettysburg Address. On that day in 1863, with the Civil War only half over and the worst yet to come, Abraham Lincoln delivered a speech now universally regarded as both the most important oration in U.S. history and the best explanation government of the people, by the people, for the people, of why this nation exists. We would expect the history of an event so monumental as the Gettysburg Address to be well established. The truth is just the opposite. The only thing scholars agree on is that the speech is short, only 10 sentences, and that it took Lincoln under 5 minutes to stand up, deliver it, and sit back down. Everything else, when Lincoln wrote it, where he wrote it, how quickly he wrote it, how he was invited, how the audience reacted, has been open to debate since the moment the words left his mouth. Now there's the hook. It's setting up a mystery that hopefully she's going to tell us more about, or at least give us an insight onto why it's a mystery. Interesting side note, by the way, Lincoln's was not the keynote speaker or the main speaker. He was actually the introduction speaker to a guy who got up and I think talked for about 2 hours. Nobody remembers the other guy. Sometimes being concise and to the point has strong benefits. Now, we have different ways of beginnings. I'm going to talk about these, and then I'm going to show you some examples. You can go back and check the examples yourself. I'm not going to read all of them. But it says here that when we begin, there's a couple of ways to approach this. First of all, we can explain the larger context of your topic. We can state a thesis. We can forecast organization. offer background information, define key terms or concepts, connect your subject to your reader's interests or values, start with something that will provoke the reader's interest, start with an anecdote, ask a question, or jump right in. Now, let me explain some of these as we get a little bit further along. So we have some examples, all right? So explain the larger context. Here's an example of someone explaining the larger context of how whatever it is they're talking about ties into things, all right? So you can look over that one. We can sometimes state a thesis statement. We'll return to this one because it's a little bit more important later on. We don't necessarily need to worry about the forecasting of organization because we're not writing a paper or anything large enough to really constitute this. So we can worry about this another time. Offering background information, you'll see this is very detailed. I would not really necessarily worry about this because we're not getting into a highly detailed paper. We're telling a narrative story. We also probably don't need to worry about defining key terms or concepts. We're not necessarily dealing with that kind of paper. Now, we could do this, connecting your subject to your reader's interests or values. This could be something we could play with, this idea. We all want to feel safe. Most Americans lock their doors at night. Obviously, safety and security are important issues to American life. Now, I wouldn't end it that way. I might use the opening sentences here as a way to lead into a discussion about being a superhero. That might be a way to approach that. Here's one that's just been designed to be provocative, and you can be a little provocative as well. It says here, let's use the F word. People say it's inappropriate, offensive, that it's puts people off, but it seems to me the best way to begin when simultaneously devalued and invaluable. Feminist, 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 feminist. Of course, that one plays on a little bit of a twist because that's probably not the F word you were thinking of. And that's the point. Starting with an anecdote might actually be something similar to what you were basically doing in the introduction of your essay. Here's an example, and what an anecdote is a short story that usually has some sort of relationship to a larger story. So here is Alfred Wright, a 19-year-old whose manhood was at stake in Longwood Avenue in the South Bronx, looked fairly calm as another teenager called him a chickenhead and compared his mother to Shamu the whale. He fingered the gold chain around his thin neck while listening to the detailed claim about his sister's sexual abilities, and then he slowly took the toothpick out of his mouth. The jeering crowd of young men quieted as he pointed his accuser and says, "He was so ugly. When he was born," Wright said, "the doctor smacked his mom instead of him." Now, hopefully this is going to lead into a larger story having to do with some sort of subject matter, perhaps the idea of the things that young men are expected to do and or expectations of young men to behave a certain way. Who knows what this story could be doing, but this should have some relationship. And so you can treat your introduction as kind of a small anecdotal story connected to the larger story you're going to tell us. And then this is a classic one that I oftentimes use in a lot of different ways. Ask a question. It's often a good way to get a ball rolling, getting things started. Are women's minds different from men's minds? You could ask yourself the same question and apply it to your essay by saying, have you ever wanted to be a superhero? That could just be an interesting way for you to break the ice and lead in, and then to start talking about what you need to start talking about to lead us to that hook. Okay? So that's where we're going to lead it. We'll come back and talk more about this essay in the future, but that's where I'm going to have a stop for right now.